They found the portal where nothing should have survived. High Archivist Kethral observed from the command dais as excavation drones peeled back slagged stone and vitrified metal. The structure beneath was circular, fractured, its surface warped, as if space itself had once folded there and then recoiled. Sensors dated the ruin at 9,000 years, older than the Council, older than any living charter, a dead thing, finally catalogued. The fleet hung in ceremonial formation above the site. 10,000 vessels, each hull lacquered and precise. This sector had been silent for centuries. The absence of resistance was expected. Humanity had vanished from records long before Kethral's brood hatched. A failed species. A footnote. Then the drones uncovered the marking. It was not decorative. It was not symbolic. It was a warning, cut deep into fused alloy and sealed, beneath layers of intentional collapse. The translation engines took 0.6 seconds to resolve the script. The human fleet will return. A ripple of amusement passed through the command tier. Kethral allowed it. Ancient threats were common in dead systems. Ritual bravado from extinct primitives. The wording itself was crude. No dates, no coordinates, no claims of dominance. Just inevitability, asserted without proof. Log as cultural artifact. Kethral ordered. Probability of human survival, negligible. A subordinate hesitated. Archivist, the portal geometry suggests transit capacity beyond known Council limits. The collapse vectors imply deliberate denial, not decay. Everything decays, Kethral replied. Even warnings. Processing began immediately seen. Dismantlement estimates, salvage yields, historical cross-references. Humanity's last recorded fleets numbered in the dozens, armored in inefficient mass, armed with kinetics obsolete even then. Their wars burned hot and ended quickly. They lacked elegance, they lacked restraint, they lacked relevance. The portal ruin registered no power, no emissions, no residual field above background radiation. For 6 hours, nothing changed. For 6 hours, the Council's presence went unchallenged. The warning remained. Kethral reviewed it once more, not out of concern but curiosity. Why carve such a message and then vanish? Why promise return without survival? It was almost pathetic. A species comforting itself at the edge of extinction. Erase it, a weapons director suggested, for record hygiene. No, Kethral said, leave it. Future expeditions may find it amusing. A soft chime interrupted the exchange. Long-range sensors registered a fluctuation at the system's periphery. Minor, brief, 42,000 AU out. The kind of noise created by dying stars or instrument drift. The warning did not change. Stand-alone, stinger. They mistook silence for proof. Kethral dismissed the alert without comment. Even if something stirred beyond the rim, it would arrive. To an empty sky. The Council fleet was already here, already dominant, already cataloguing the past. Humanity had been processed by history. Another stinger. Almost an afterthought. Extinct species do not return. The archivist turned back to the ruin, satisfied, as the fleet continued its work above a door that had not opened yet. Authority had never needed to listen. High Archivist Kethral stood as... The first transmission arrived, not as a surprise, but as an irritation. The signal did not force entry, it did not override Council channels or blind sensors. It requested connection, formally, on frequencies so old they had fallen out of doctrine. A courtesy, extended too late. The voice that followed was human, unfiltered, unadorned, no modulation beyond clarity. This system is under observation by the United Human Polity. Cease all excavation. Evacuation corridors are now open. You have 90 minutes to comply. The bridge went still. Council law officers moved first, flooding Kethral's display with precedent tags and authority glyphs. This region had been annexed, 6 centuries earlier. Salvage rights were absolute. No living signatory contested Council claims. The human polity was not even a recognized successor state. Kethral allowed the transmission to continue. Corridors are marked in your navigational lattice, the human voice said. They will remain stable for 90 minutes. Non-combatant vessels will not be targeted. Command elements that power weapons after this window will be considered hostile. There was no threat in the phrasing, no heat, no escalation, just terms, delivered as if they would be accepted. A weapons director laughed openly. They offer mercy from extinction. Kethral raised one hand, silencing the deck. Humans, he said, tasting the word. You are trespassing in council space. Withdraw immediately or be subject to corrective action. A pause. Exactly 3 seconds. Negative, the human replied. Your fleet is operating on a marked historical site under human protection. This is your final notice. Stand alone. Stinger. They spoke as if authority was transferable. Council doctrine was clear. Authority flowed from continuity. The council endured. Therefore, it ruled. Humanity had vanished. Therefore, it did not. Precedent alone was sufficient cause. Kethral signaled the refusal. It was logged, time-stamped, and transmitted across all fleet elements. The evacuation corridors appeared on the map regardless. 6 wide arcs, extending from the excavation zone, clean and geometrically generous. Their breadth alone was insulting. Attempting psychological positioning, an analyst said. Classic. Weak state behavior, Kethral agreed. They wish to be seen as reasonable before annihilation. 90 minutes counted down. The fleet did not move. Excavation continued. Drones cut deeper into the portal ring, peeling back alloy that had survived 9 millennia of silence. At 60 minutes, the human voice returned. 30 minutes remaining. No response. At 30 minutes, the corridors remained open. No council ship altered course. Formation discipline held. 10,000 hulls, unmoved. At 10 minutes, the human voice spoke once more. Unchanged. Corridors closing in 10 minutes. Last call. Standalone Stinger. They mistook mercy for weakness. Kethral authorized escalation planning, not fire. Council law required formal sequence. Warnings had been exchanged, refusal recorded. Supremacy affirmed. The humans would fire, first, if they dared, and history would note who broke peace. The timer reached 0. The corridors collapsed, not violently, but cleanly, vanishing from the lattice as if they had never been offered. Kethral felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. Begin corrective action, he said. Far beyond the excavation site, human ships adjusted orientation by fractions of a degree, and the first range markers began to close. The opening salvo was textbook. Council fire doctrine prioritized demonstration over destruction. Precision mattered. Authority was reinforced by inevitability, not excess. At Kethral's command, the forward batteries aligned, coherent lances, phased plasma sheets, and gravitic shear tuned to shred mass-based hulls. Range, 120,000 kilometers. Duration, 18 seconds, expected survivability, 0, fire. Light crossed the void. Energy volumes sufficient to boil oceans struck the human escorts first. 37 ships positioned ahead of the main formation, their profiles blunt, almost primitive. Impacts flared white across their hulls. Sensor, feeds saturated. Radiation alarms spiked across the command tier. For 1.2 seconds, the council bridge waited for confirmation. None came. The human ships did not fragment. They did not tumble. They did not lose cohesion. As the glare faded, the escorts remained on vector, velocity unchanged. A systems officer leaned forward. Rechecking telemetry. Energy readings cascaded down the display. Absorption curves. Resolved where penetration graphs should have been. Archivist, the officer said slowly. Hull breach count, 0. Silence. Kethral stepped closer. Explain. Impact energy redistributed, the officer replied. Layered dissipation. Thermal bleed-through capped at 8%. Structural loss under 0.4% across all struck vessels. Another console chimed. Secondary fire complete. Results consistent. Council weapons had hit with full yield. Nothing had gone through. Standalone Stinger, it didn't penetrate. Kethral's crest tightened, a physiological tell he had not displayed in decades. Recalibrate, increase output. The second volley doubled intensity, frequencies shifted, phase offsets randomized, the kind of fire that collapsed asteroid fortresses. Again, The human hulls flared. Again they held. New data scrolled in, impossible and precise. Energy absorption efficiency, 92%. Peak thermal spike duration, 0.7 seconds. Crew casualties, none detected. They're bleeding it off, an analyst whispered. Like heat. Sinks. Like armor. Armor. The word felt archaic. Council vessels relied on fields, not mass. Protection was elegance. Avoidance, deflection, negation. Humans had built walls and dared the universe to strike them. The escorts adjusted formation slightly, overlapping fields of debris and radiation, shielding the larger vessels behind them. The maneuver was deliberate, protective. Kethral realized, with a cold clarity, that the humans had expected this. "Cease fire!" he ordered, too late to disguise the edge in his voice. The firing stopped. The human ships did not respond. They did not counterattack. They did not retreat. They continued to close at a steady rate, distance ticking down from 120,000 to 98,000 kilometers. A human transmission cut in, identical channel, identical tone. Energy. Weapons ineffective at current ranges, the voice said. Recommend disengagement. No triumph, no taunt. Just information. Standalone stinger. They had numbers for everything. Council observers began cross-checking historical files, frantic now. Old human battle doctrines resurfaced. References to ablative mass, sacrificial layers, survivability margins. Concepts long dismissed as inefficient. Kethral watched the range markers shrink and understood the shift. This was not a skirmish. This was a test, and the Council had failed it on first contact. The human fleet continued forward. Hulls, scorched but intact as acceleration curves quietly began to steepen. Distance was supposed to protect authority. Council doctrine treated space as depth. Layers of warning, engagement envelopes, and controlled escalation. Range bought time. Time. Preserved order. Kethral watched the tactical plot with practiced calm as human ships continued their approach, still outside optimal kinetic distance. Then their acceleration profiles updated. Numbers appeared where none should have. Velocity change detected, a navigator reported. Human escorts increasing thrust. How much? Kethral asked. The answer came with a pause, the kind that preceded embarrassment. Initial spike, 6G, correction, now 9, no, 12G sustained. A ripple of disbelief moved through the bridge. Council crews blacked out at 4G without inertial buffering. Structural tolerances failed not long after. No known fleet sustained double-digit acceleration without catastrophic loss. The human ships did not slow. They did not burn out. They leaned into the thrust and kept coming. Distance collapsed from 98,000 kilometers to 70,000 in under a minute. Vector lines rewrote themselves across the display, human trajectories bending in controlled arcs that ignored Council firing solutions. They're not charging, an analyst said. They're maneuvering under thrust. The escort split, laterally, not scattering but flowing, each ship adjusting by degrees, sliding through intersecting vectors without collision. It was formation, flying at lethal acceleration, every hull trusting the others not to falter. Council formations began to unravel. Elegant, wide dispersals designed for energy fire suddenly worked against them. Human ships punched through gaps, too small for doctrine to anticipate, appearing inside layered envelopes where response times halved and then vanished. Range, 50,000 kilometers. Time elapsed, 94 seconds. Bring up gravitic dampening, Kethral ordered. Force spacing. The fields engaged, warping local space to shove intruders off course. Human vectors wobbled, then corrected. Counterthrust flared. Mass answered distortion with momentum. They rode through it. Stand-alone stinger, they treated physics as terrain. Acceleration. Aimed again. G sustained. Council tactical officers began reporting crew losses, not from enemy fire, but from inertia. Ships lagged behind formation intent. Command cohesion fractured as captains fought their own limits. Human ships showed no such degradation. Telemetry suggested internal compensation beyond Council modeling. Their thrust burns were short, brutal, precise, each maneuver shaving kilometers, not wasting motion. Distance fell to 30,000 kilometers. Point defense engagement windows collapsing, a weapons director warned. Kinetic intercept probability dropping below 40%. Kethral felt the doctrine fail around him, not loudly, but quietly, like a structure exceeding tolerances it had never measured. The human formation compressed, escorts tightening their screen as heavier vessels slid forward behind them. The motion was patient, relentless, as if the outcome had already been calculated and this was merely execution. Stand-alone stinger. They closed the gap on schedule. At 18,000 kilometers, Council ships began emergency reorientation, breaking ceremonial alignment in favor of survival angles. It was the first visible concession. Authority bending under math. Kethral watched the plot stabilize into a new, terrible truth. Distance was no longer a buffer. It was a liability already spent. The human fleet did not rush the final kilometers. They adjusted vectors, synchronized clocks, and prepared to demonstrate what happened next when space ran out. Command died by schedule. At 15,000 kilometers, the human fleet stopped accelerating, not because it had reached a limit, but because it had reached a solution. Vector lines froze into alignment bands. Timers appeared on council scopes, uninvited overlays resolving into synchronized countdowns. New emissions, a sensor chief reported. Magnetic spikes along human spinal mounts. Kethral knew the term from obsolete archives. He wished he did not. Railguns. The first salvo launched without warning. No charge glow, no thermal bloom, just mass, accelerated to certainty. Range, 14,800 kilometers. Time to impact, 1.9 seconds. Council point defense reacted on instinct, saturating space with intercept fire designed for missiles and energy constructs. It was the wrong answer. Slugs punched through screens and hulls alike, each impact a localized catastrophe measured in tons of force. The lead command cruiser vanished in 3 discrete hits: keel, reactor ring, bridge, cleanly sequenced as if struck by design. Stand-alone stinger! They counted the seconds. Missiles followed, not a swarm. A ledger. Each human vessel released a fixed number, 12 from escorts, 24 from line ships. Launch intervals staggered by milliseconds to overwhelm prediction rather than volume. Drives burned cold. Guidance was inertial, immune to jamming. Intercept rates falling, a weapons director said. Now 22%, now 11%. Explosions stitched across the formation, not random, hierarchical. Communication ships first, sensor nodes next. Vessels carrying command authority tags went dark, one by one, their loss rippling confusion outward. Kethral's display flagged priority kills as they occurred, flagship class losses. 2, time elapsed, 38 seconds. The Council returned fire, but without cohesion. Energy lances cut empty space where human ships had been moments earlier. Kinetics answered again, another railgun cycle, this one tighter, faster. Range, 12,000 kilometers. Impact cadence, 1 strike every 0.4 seconds. Hull fragments drifted where authority had been. Then the nuclear options appeared. They were not city killers, not planet crackers. They were shaped, limited, deliberate, detonations tuned to hard radiation and electromagnetic collapse. Each burst erased a cluster of ships without touching those beyond its calculated envelope. Localized nuclear strikes. An analyst breathed. Their trimming, standalone stinger, even their excess was precise. 7 command ships died in the first 3 minutes. Not the largest, not the most armed, the ones that mattered. Control evaporated faster than crews could understand why orders no longer arrived. Kethral felt the moment authority broke. It was not emotional. It was procedural, without command. Verification. Council law restricted autonomous escalation. Ships hesitated. Some attempted withdrawal. Others froze, awaiting confirmation that would never come. The human fleet did not pursue fleeing vessels. Fire tracked only those that powered, weapons or attempted reorganization. The pattern was unmistakable, dominance without chaos. Casualty projections updated against expectation. Council ships destroyed. 312. Human ships lost. 0. Human escorts damaged beyond mission threshold. 0. The numbers were obscene. A human transmission. Cut through the debris field. Command elements neutralized, the voice said. All remaining vessels, power down weapons. Surrender protocols now active. No triumph, no threat. Just the next step. Kethral looked at the tactical plot and understood the arithmetic that had undone him. Humans did not overwhelm. They subtracted, cleanly, until the equation balanced in their favor and then stopped. Silence spread across the fleet, not the silence of absence but of restraint imposed. As wreckage cooled and clocks reset, human ships held position. Guns, tracking but idle, having finished the count they had come to perform. The guns stayed quiet. That was the first thing the Council noticed. After the last command ship broke apart and drifted, after missile plumes faded and radiation counters stabilized, nothing followed. No pursuit. No final sweep. The human fleet held position at 10,000 kilometers, weapons hot but idle. Silence imposed. Kethral remained on the bridge of a crippled flagship, emergency power humming through fractured decks. Authority was gone, but life support held. That alone defied expectation. A system-wide broadcast opened without forcing channels. This is the United Human Polity, the voice said, unchanged by victory. All Council vessels are ordered to power down primary and secondary weapons. Compliance will be met with protection, non-compliance will be met with restraint, then force. No flourish, no anthem. Just procedure. Status lights began changing across the tactical plot. One by one, Council ships powered down. Some delayed. A few tried to run. Human targeting followed them, patient and precise, until drives cut and motion ceased. Then the second transmission began. By human law, the voice continued, slavery is a crime. Indentured combat crews, coerced auxiliaries, and bound labor aboard Council vessels are to be identified immediately. Medical and extraction teams are en route. A ripple passed through the surviving fleet, not fear, but confusion. Council doctrine did not classify bonded labor as slavery. It classified it as efficiency. By human law, the voice said, surrendered combatants will not be executed. They will be detained, treated, and tried as individuals. Guilt is personal. Survival is not a concession. Standalone Stinger, they stopped winning to explain why. Human ships moved now, but not aggressively. Boarding craft launched in measured numbers, vectors plotted to avoid intimidation. Hull markings pulsed. Symbols Kethral did not recognize, but which repeated with legal regularity. Medical signatures followed. Council crews waited for violence that did not come. Instead, docking clamps engaged. Atmospheres equalized. Armed, humans crossed thresholds with weapons slung low, visors up, moving with disciplined restraint. Resistance will escalate response, the broadcast said. Compliance will not. Numbers flowed across open channels, as if meant to be seen. Detention capacity prepared. 1.5 million medical teams deployed. 420 units, evacuation shuttles. Inbound, 3,200. Kethral watched bonded workers escorted out of holds they had never left alive before. Watched injured Council officers receive treatment without interrogation. Watched human recorders log names, ranks, and actions instead of kill tallies. This was not mercy as performance. It was process. Standalone Stinger, they called it law. A final clause followed, quieter but heavier. Attempts to self-destruct vessels, erase crews, or annihilate evidence will be treated as crimes against sentient life. Preservation is mandatory. Kethral understood then that annihilation had never been the objective. Control had been. And once control was absolute, killing became unnecessary. The human fleet maintained its perimeter, holding space steady while order replaced chaos. Trials would come later. Judgments would be slow, public, irrevocable. For the first time since the portal was uncovered, the Council's survivors realized they were not facing conquerors. They were facing a system that expected to outlast them. The observers broke silence once the killing stopped. They had been there from the beginning, coalition survey ships tucked beyond the system's gravity well, running passive arrays, recording everything. Neutral by charter, invisible by design. Now their channels lit up, not with questions, but with confirmations. "We have corroboration," the Coalition envoy said, voice steady despite the wreckage still cooling on every display. "Human activity predating this engagement. Extensive. Classified." Kethral listened from confinement, restrained but lucid, as data flowed where accusations once lived. The portal was not unknown to humanity. Coalition archives unfolded in layers, each older than the last. Long baseline probes placed 312 years ago. Deep-time observatories seeded along rimward vectors. Automated listening posts keyed to a specific energy geometry, this geometry. "This site," the envoy continued, "matches 37 other ruins across 8 sectors. All share identical collapse signatures. All predate recorded reminders of human withdrawal." Withdrawal. That was the word the Council had never understood. Humanity had not vanished. It had stepped back. Stand alone. Stinger, they didn't disappear. They prepared. The observers displayed simulations, reconstructions of the portal in its prime. Transit capacity orders of magnitude beyond Council infrastructure. One-way burn marks, forced closure from the inside. Humanity had found the doors, learned what came through them, and chosen absence over exposure. And when ships went missing, a Coalition analyst added, exterminator events, entire systems sterilized, no debris fields, no survivors. We now assess those losses as pre-contact encounters humanity survived alone. Alone, but not idle. Human doctrine files surfaced next, voluntarily released. Not propaganda, manuals. Training standards measured in centuries, not campaigns. Ship. Designs iterated across generations, each one less elegant, more survivable. Armor layered, not for beauty, but for the first hit. And the 100th. Crews trained under sustained acceleration. Under deprivation. Under command loss. Every human ship was built to fight cut off, outnumbered, and ignored. They assumed, the envoy said carefully, that when contact resumed, authority would not believe them. Kethral felt the weight of that sentence settle. It explained the calm, the patience, the numbers ready at hand. Humanity had rehearsed this refusal. Stand alone, Stinger. Mockery was anticipated. The portal warning was not a threat. It was a timestamp, without a date. A promise tied to readiness, not rage. Humanity would return when it could enforce terms, not ask for recognition. Coalition projections followed, grim and precise. If the portal network reactivated under hostile control, casualty, estimates ran into the tens of billions within the first year. Humanity's preparations aligned exactly to counter that scenario. Kinetic dominance, armor over fields, law enforced after supremacy. They were building for extinction-class contact, the envoy concluded. Not for you. Silence followed. Not the stunned quiet of defeat, but the sober stillness of understanding, arriving too late. The observers ended their transmission with a final disclosure. Long-range sensors had begun matching new signals beyond the rim, identical to those logged before historic disappearances. Humanity's listening posts were already tracking them. This battle, the Coalition realized, had not been a war. It had been a systems check. Dominance proceeded on time. With command authority severed, the Council fleet fragmented into 3 behaviors within 6 minutes. 30% powered down immediately. 40% attempted withdrawal along independent vectors. The remainder hesitated, waiting for orders that doctrine said must come, and never would. Human clocks did not wait. At T+0000, synchronized markers pulsed across the battle space. Not warnings, triggers, strike groups detached from the human. They line with mechanical calm. Each group carried a number, not a name. Each number matched a pre-computed task set. No improvisation, no pursuit driven by emotion. Missiles launched first, not toward fleeing ships, but toward the spaces between them. Detonations flared into patterned radiation blooms, shaping corridors of denial. Council vessels trying to flee found their vectors pinched, herded back into bounded volumes without being struck. Range control, enforced. At T+0140, boarding operations began. Human cutters latched onto immobilized hulls in batches of 8. Docking angles were uniform, entry points identical. Internal resistance lasted an average of 94 seconds per vessel. Where crews complied, weapons stayed slung. Where they didn't, stun fire and suppression followed, clinical and contained. Detained vessels counter-incremented in real time. First 5 minutes, 412 ships secured. Human casualties, 0, standalone. Stinger. They ran the war like logistics. At T+4, Zajur, the last organized council firing attempt occurred, an isolated cluster of destroyers attempting a mutual defense knot. Human response was immediate, but limited. Railgun fire disabled, drives only. No reactor strikes, no follow-up. The knot unraveled. Surrender signals spiked across the spectrum, erratic at first, then coherent as translation packets propagated. Humans responded to every signal with identical acknowledgement codes. The consistency mattered. It taught faster than fear. By minute 10, the cascade was irreversible. Council ships that had planned to resist watched neighbors survive by compliance. Crews powered down weapons before human targeting locked. Some broadcast surrender twice, unsure the first would be believed. Human ships answered everyone. Standalone Stinger, compliance became contagious. At T+12, Kaim, nuclear options reappeared, but only as threat geometry. Warheads maneuvered into visible holding orbits near 2 carrier clusters still attempting reorganization. No detonation followed. The implication sufficed. Both clusters powered down within 30 seconds. Quantified restraint, the battle space stabilized by minute 18. Council vessels destroyed in this phase. 214 Council vessels captured or immobilized. 3,987 Council vessels escaped beyond interdiction. 17 Human losses remained unchanged. Inside the secured hulls, order replaced panic with unnerving speed. Human teams catalogued crews, separated bonded labor from command staff, and sealed data cores against tampering. Self-destruct attempts were intercepted in 12 cases, all stopped before initiation thresholds. Human discipline did not slip with victory. If anything, it tightened. At T+22 Zoe, the human fleet reformed, not for pursuit but for containment. Perimeter rings locked into place around the debris field and surrendered ships alike. No vessel drifted untracked. No signal went unanswered. From confinement. Kethral watched the numbers finalize. He had believed supremacy meant endurance. Humanity had redefined it as control over outcomes. A final broadcast followed, system-wide, brief. All remaining council vessels, the human voice said. This engagement phase is complete. No further fire will be initiated unless compliance is broken. Medical, legal, and recovery operations are now primary. Primary.war demoted by schedule. The last surrender came at T+27, a lone cruiser that had fled on minimal power, engines burning cold. Human interceptors flanked it without firing, matched velocity, and waited. After 4 minutes, the cruiser powered down. The count closed. Human ships did not celebrate. They adjusted orbits, logged fuel expenditure, and reassigned crews to boarding. Rotations. Dominance, once achieved, was treated as a condition to maintain, not a moment to savor. As debris fields cooled and surrender beacons stabilized, the system settled into a new equilibrium, one enforced not by threat alone, but by relentless follow-through. The human fleet held, steady and patient, having dismantled a force 10,000 strong without ever breaking cadence. Authority fractured, quietly. There was no proclamation announcing its end, no broadcast declaring victory. The council simply failed to reassert itself, and the vacuum filled with procedure that worked. Human detention hubs came online within hours, modular structures, anchored to stable orbits, their layouts published openly across coalition channels. Every surrendered crew member was logged by name, species, and role. Medical triage preceded interrogation. Nutrition followed treatment. Restraints were present, visible, and temporary. Kethral was transferred without ceremony. No blindfold. no humiliation. His injuries were treated before questions were asked. "You are not a prisoner of war," the human officer informed him, voice level. "You are a defendant." That distinction traveled faster than fear. Across the captured fleet, bonded laborers were separated from command staff and given a choice, for the first time recorded in Council history. Remain aboard under protection or evacuate immediately. Over 82% chose evacuation within the first 12 hours. Transports ran continuously. Evacuees processed 1.3 million fatalities during transfer, 0 standalone stinger. They survived the surrender. Council law had never planned for this. Authority depended on inevitability, on the belief that compliance was safer than refusal. Human systems offered proof to the contrary. Survival with accountability, not erasure. Trials were announced, not scheduled. Evidence preservation orders followed. Human legal packets spread across open networks, translated into coalition standard frames. Crimes listed were specific, penalties bounded, rights enumerated without exception clauses. Slavery was named. So was extermination doctrine. So was command negligence resulting in civilian loss. Council captains began doing something unprecedented, defecting. At first, it was individual ships, vessels whose home systems lay far from the core, whose loyalty had always been pragmatic rather than ideological. They petitioned for provisional protection under human law, offering data cores and testimony in exchange for jurisdiction. Humans accepted conditionally. By day 3, entire member systems followed. Coalition channels filled with declarations of alignment, not allegiance, but legal adoption. Anti-slavery statutes ratified, trial observers requested, human advisors invited, not imposed. Standalone stinger, authority leaked away. The Council's remaining representatives attempted emergency convocation. Attendance failed quorum. Without fleets, enforcement collapsed. Without enforcement, precedent meant nothing. Kethral learned of the defections from an open feed. No one shielded him from it. Transparency, the humans called it. "You could have killed us," he said during his first deposition. The human recorder did not look up. "That would have ended the problem you saw," she replied. "Not the one we're solving." Outside, the system changed character. Wreckage was cleared methodically. Captured ships were stabilized, not stripped. Refugees were routed toward coalition worlds that had already adopted human protections. Maps updated. Not with borders, but with legal overlays. Humanity did not claim territory. It claimed standards. By the end of the first week, Council authority existed only as archived, a law and detained leadership. Power had moved, not by conquest, but by consent under duress of comparison. The galaxy had seen the alternative, and it was choosing it. The system settled into quiet that was not empty. Debris fields thinned under controlled burns. Stabilized. Hulls held station in compliant orbits. Human logistics ships moved with the same precision they had shown in battle, turning wreckage into managed mass and surrender into process. Nothing drifted unmanaged. Nothing was forgotten. Kethral watched, from confinement as the portal site was sealed, not destroyed, not erased, but enclosed within layered exclusion shells. The warning etched into fused alloy was left untouched. Recorded, translated, preserved. History treated as evidence. 3 days after the last surrender, the alert came in without drama. Long-range anomaly confirmation, a human sensor officer, reported across an open channel. Cross-referencing portal signatures now. Coalition observers leaned in, so did defected Council analysts. The data unfolded cleanly, indifferent to who watched. Signal origin, outer rim, distance 42,000 AU and closing. Emission profile. Partial match. Partial became complete as additional arrays locked on. The signature aligned with archived disappearance events, energy geometry identical to the portal ruin, phase drift matching forced collapse models, the same asymmetry. The same absence of noise around something massive enough to silence stars. Standalone stinger, the warning was not unique. Human listening posts responded first, not with alarm, but activation. Systems long dormant came fully awake. Deep-range trackers adjusted baselines. Fleets that had not fired a shot in this battle shifted posture across multiple sectors. This contact, the human voice said on a shared channel, matches exterminator-class movement patterns. Estimated arrival window, 97 days. No one asked how humanity knew what to call it. Coalition envoys exchanged looks that needed no translation. Council survivors felt the implications settle heavier than defeat. The portal had not been a weapon. It had been a door held shut, and something was testing it again. Standalone stinger! This time, the signal was answered. Humanity did not declare emergency powers. It did not conscript allies or issue ultimatums. Instead, it shared the data, raw, complete. Enough for any polity to understand what approached and what preparation would require. Defected systems reaffirmed their legal alignment within the hour. Evacuation models updated. Defense corridors expanded beyond this single system. Human fleets redistributed, not massing, but layering, depth over spectacle. Kethral realized then the final truth the warning had carried. Humanity had not returned for the Council. The Council had simply been in the way. As the portal site dimmed behind containment fields and long-range plots filled with new vectors, the galaxy moved into a different phase, one where extinction threats were no longer myths and survival was no longer delegated to authority alone. Far beyond the rim, the same signature advanced, steady and precise. And this time, it would not find the door unguarded.